Welcome to the Athletic Performance Podcast, a conversation for all things performance related. I'm your host, Ryan Patrick, and today we're going to do a deep dive on everything speed, power, and strength. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Do you find yourself wondering if your clients really need all those breathing drills, or if there's a better way to help them move, feel, and perform? Do you question whether poor movement is always a positional issue or something deeper, like connective tissue behavior or pressure management is the missing link? Then this episode is for you. I'm joined by Katie St. Clair, one of the sharpest minds in the rehab to performance space. If you've seen her Instagram, you know the exercises look creative, but underneath it all is a principled, repeatable system, one that balances intuition, real-world coaching experience, and cutting-edge physiology. In today's episode, we talk about the evolution of her training model from rigid theory to intuitive application, why she scrapped passive assessments and now builds trust through movement, how she layers in connective tissue work to address things that breathing drills can't fix, why pelvic floor issues aren't just a female concern, and how guys are missing the boat on this. Practical ways to help Gen Pop clients jump again without leaking, breaking down, or feeling like rehab patients. And yes, how to grow your glutes without wrecking a pelvis. Whether you're a strength coach, clinician, or just someone who wants to train smarter across a lifetime, this one's a blueprint for building bodies that last. Let's get into it. Here's a good place to start. So you were kind of talking about how your model evolved. And I think this is really interesting because when I look at your content, you have some of the most creative stuff that I see out there. And I don't want this to sound like a disparaging way, but a lot of it is similar. And in that sense, what I mean is you can tell it's very principle based, right? It's adhering to certain concepts and philosophies where other people, when they post new stuff or different stuff, I'm like, they're clearly making shit up. Like this, no one is using that. But your stuff, we use it all the time at the gym. I'm like, hey, I need some ideas. Like I'm going to go see what Katie's got.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think to kind of like actually bring this to a question is just to talk about the evolution of your model over the last couple of years. Like, where's it now? What's your thought process when you're using some of these exercises?
Okay. It's probably going to be hard to do a little elevator pitch here, but I think at first I was so detail oriented and like nitty gritty and thinking so much about the whole position dictates function. And we've got to restore movement variability. I sound like a robot when I say that, like that whole side of things. And the longer I've gone on, the more I am able to keep it very simple and trust my eye. Like I think sometimes when you start doing a bunch of table tests and all of that, you're starting to put yourself into this box of if this, then that all of the time. And it almost reduces the ability to just trust like my movement lens as an athlete for many, many years, as someone who has worked with people in person for 20 years, watching them move. Do you know what I mean? And there's so much value in that. And so now I feel like I really trust my intuition. And sometimes it's not position is dictating the function. Like you're not having a hip hike because you don't have internal rotation. Like that's not always the case. Sometimes you have a hip hike because poor motor control, a little bit of laxity on the outside of the hip, needing a little bit of a constraint, just making the person aware of it. And so that's how I've changed so much. And I think being able to understand that internal rotation is not everything, external rotation is not everything. We're basically just trying to get people to breathe in all the areas of their rib cage and just restore that pumping action of the diaphragm. That's like one. And then step two is worrying about the position of the joints and trying to like make sure someone just has enough movement to do whatever they want. And then number three, which I've really gone down the rabbit hole in the past 2 years, is connective tissue. So really understanding connective tissue behavior and realizing that like this 90-90 hip shift is never going to help this laxity in that hip, but working with the connective tissue and building some more stiffness, whether that's in the lower limb to support the hip or wherever, is actually going to prevent the hip hike. You know what I mean? And so like, so maybe I need to come at it from the connective tissue. Maybe I need to come at it from a muscle lens. You just need to get stronger. Maybe it needs to be positioned because you're in a lot of pain and your low back hurts all the time. And So I still think like the foundation of utilizing the breath and optimizing pressure in terms of that canister, whatever you want to call it, of just managing everything against gravity is like really
Mm-hmm.
important, because I do see a lot of people who have issues, I guess, because that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of always been where I've been in this industry, is like bridging that gap between rehab and performance. But beyond that, I think there's so many ways that you can come in and make changes for people, and not always positional based. I'll say that. Does that make sense? And so when I test people, I don't do any passive range of motion tests anymore. It's all active. I watch them do a toe touch is a squat, a standing rotation test.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally, I'll have them do like an Apley's internal rotation. And I don't even do an overhead raise test anymore. I teach it in my course, but I don't do it myself, because if you can't touch your toes, I know you need posterior expansion. So, and I don't test
Yeah.
the hip at all, because I just assume whatever position the scap is in, the pelvis is going to probably be going along for the ride.
Yeah, I think about this a lot too, because I'm working with athletes. So they're up on their feet, they're moving around. They're not supine on a table without the constraint of gravity, right? They're always having to work with gravity. And along the way, you said something about it might not be a position issue. It might not be a strength issue. But I remember way back to the days of the FMS. So the overhead squat was like the be all end all of test. And I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but one of the things that kind of popped in my head was the Newell's constraints, right? The human, or they say organism, which I hate, task, and environment. And I remember seeing an elite Olympic lifter, like Olympian from another country, fail the overhead squat test. Now, if you think about catching a snatch, it's basically an overhead squat, but you give this guy a loaded barbell, you give him an Olympic lifting shoe and a belt, and all of a sudden, that failed body weight squat is one of the most perfect things that you've ever seen. And I think some of the stuff you're saying is, if we can give people the right types of constraints or modify the exercise, it might not be something where we have to get down on the ground and woo-saw our way to more hip rotation.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's good to have those tools when you need them, because somebody is in pain or can't achieve something because it's positional in nature.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, like you said, really important to understand the constraints that you're giving them, the tasks that you're asking them to do. And likely that athlete is really good when they have enough force being put down on their body, and then they can do what they're supposed to. And then without it, they can't. I mean, that's really common. It's giving you more sensory feedback. You can feel where you are in space when you add load. I mean, that's just one thing. You put them in front of a crowd, talk about
Mm-hmm.
environment, and everybody's cheering them
Mm-hmm.
on. Yeah, they're going to get the job done and do whatever it takes.
Mm-hmm.
Every single thing I ever did in gymnastics was compensatory. That's
Yeah.
why I was a good gymnast, because I was doing things that didn't make sense for my body. Like, I know who has enough movement variability to do a back bend and put their leg over their head. That's not like normal. This is pathology over and over again, but I still did it. And I'm not saying that was good. That led me with a lot of problems in my body. But I think there's a balance between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes just being able to coach a movement really well. And like you said, like you'll look at my stuff and be like, oh, okay, we actually can use that exercise. And it's really because a lot of times I'm just coaching the full range of motion of exercises. Like that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I'm not. You're always taking motion away, or you're always giving motion to a degree, right? So I know that if I go do a heavy bench or a heavy squat, I'm taking motion away from my body. But if I just follow that up with something that's going through a full range of motion and I'm breathing while I'm doing it, I'm just giving myself back a little bit of motion. And so what I'm teaching is actually relatively simple. It's saying inhale and exhale, sometimes when you're going into ER, sometimes when you're going into IR, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
all the way from this end of the spectrum in ER to this end of the spectrum in IR in the same exercise, and then just breathe there. And most people feel really good in their bodies when they can do that without having to like necessarily go down the rabbit hole of like why you're hip hiking, why you're flaring your ribs. We make it more complicated. I make it more complicated. I'll speak for myself. I'm not saying we, but I make it more complicated than needed, even when I'm teaching. And I'll be teaching these lectures in my course I've taught for 4 years. And sometimes I'll be talking to the students. I'm like, I really hate this slide. Let me just explain it this way. So it's just like I made it out 3 or 4 years ago. I've probably updated it a few times, but I still don't like the way it sounds. And every time I've gotten more used to just kind of like not even just kind of, hey, here's a slide, but just listen to me talk this out with you. It's almost easier that way.
Oh yeah, totally. I think if you've been in this industry a while, and we've already talked about the FMS, but then you have PRI and you have current contemporary 3-letter models of everything out there.
Yeah.
One of the things that feels to me that it was really restrictive and maybe created more confusion was all the algorithms.
Yeah.
We want this, and to some degree, like if I'm a young coach just getting into it, this stuff's kind of helpful, right? I need a cookbook. I need to know how to cook before I really start being a chef. But to your point, you've got all this experience, you've got knowledge, and once you understand the principles, whatever they are, locomotion, respiration, and how they influence, you can start to be more creative with the application of this stuff because it still adheres to a lot of the principles. And back in the day when I was like more in the strength world and blogs were a big deal, I would read some strength stuff and it would be very, very deep into detail and I'd get really confused and all the details would just really make me less effective. And then I'd go read something like Dan John. And it's not to say Dan John is not knowledgeable or doesn't understand that, but his application of stuff was just so simple.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it almost helped me kind of calibrate this idea of how do I think complex and entertain a lot of these ideas, but at the same time execute very simply. And I feel like the bridge that you've built between those two is just really easy to walk across because, like I said, I look at your stuff, I'm like, I see, like when she's talking about late propulsion, I see it in this exercise and this exercise and this exercise. And I understand a lot of the similarities. So if I have somebody who has a deficit in hip extension or can access this late propulsive position, I'm like, man, I got a whole series of things because I understand a lot of the principles. And so sometimes for my own sake, because I'm an athlete, I'm like, all this ground rolling shit. I'm like, I just need to move. And so I'm like, you know what, screw it. Motion is lotion. Let's just get going.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I tell my students this, I'm very honest with them. Like, I don't do any breathing drills hardly ever. And it's not because I don't find them useful. I've just gotten to a place where I can get the same adaptations within an exercise. And sometimes I can get better adaptations. And I see it with my clients too. Some people do respond like really well to the breathing stuff and the positional stuff and rolling on the ground to change pelvis or rib cage or whatever it is. Some people do respond really well and it sticks, but a lot of people don't. And I find that stuff is kind of, I don't want to say detraining in a way, but it is a
It
little.
is. It is. Let's say it. Say it, Katie.
Kind of is. So what I like to use it for in my course is when we're doing assessments, the assessment leads us to a position. We're trying to find a position. So I usually have them pick one of 4, just to keep it simple because I don't want people getting overwhelmed. And then I have them and we change like the way the arms are or positioned basically to block certain areas off. And then I have them do the breathing drill and I teach them how to breathe because I think fundamentally learning how to get that coordination between the diaphragms is really important. So I want to teach that baseline for sure in everybody. But then we use the breathing drill to tell us if it worked and created change. And if it did, I want to move straight to the exercises. Does that make sense? I don't want to, yes, take this breathing drill if it makes you feel good and you want to do it every single day. Maybe you want to do it like after you play 3 hours of tennis to restore your body. Great. But that's not what I'm here to focus with you on. My client that was just in here, does she have a lot of compression in certain areas? And yes, is her pelvis a little more turned to the right? Yes. Okay. She came in on Monday after being on vacation and said, I'm so irritated back here. Okay. Then, okay, we spent a little time on a breathing drill, but she came in today. She felt great. So we jumped right in, band around the knees. Let's get your glutes going. She wants to get bigger glutes. We're not going to do that if we don't spend the entire 60 minutes actually training, because it takes a lot of stimulus to be able to get your glutes to grow. And that's a real life want that she has. So, yes, sometimes
that we all have.
but yeah. So my thing is now the breathing drills are part of the assessment. And then if they work, I'm like, oh, okay, so you do need more chest expansion. Okay, great. How do we get that in an exercise?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to approach it because one, to your point, you're still training.
Yeah.
I think those are more likely to stick. Breathing drills are so low level that yes, you can get a change, but again, in most cases, you're not contending with gravity. So once you get upright, like what's the likelihood this is still going to be there? I don't know. And something else I just don't think enough people are talking about, and this is just my experience because I do have a younger population, I find that they're super malleable. So they might come in all janky, staggered pelvis, no IR. It's like I can get them in and out of more ranges of motion pretty quick. But it seems like that just as quick as they are getting it into something, they can easily get out of it. So might as well be training and doing something useful with them that's going to drive some other fitness adaptations other than, yay, more hip IR. That's not exciting for anybody.
Yeah.
Unless they're in pain.
And kids, I mean, their bodies are so odd anyway. Everything's kind of odd because they don't have the stiffness that they need to like really control motion yet, unless they're in some sport. Like I'd say, like the sports that I mainly see where the stiffness is developed a little bit earlier, and this is my bias because I was a gymnast, but gymnasts have an ability to really create like a lot of bounce and stiffness. And then wrestlers, like the way that they use their body, I just feel like their ability to like co-contract, that's basically what I'm thinking of. Co-contract every single muscle in their body and create that tension is just there. And gymnasts are kind of the same. Like you think of an iron cross, like how does a kid who still is developing, their connective tissue is much more lax probably, how do they create that tension everywhere? It's a really interesting. Certain sports I think gravitate towards that ability to do that better than others. Like swimmers, they're not able to tense. And so you can see that develop over their lifespan too, if they stay in the sport. So kids are very interesting. You work how old? What's the age of your?
The youngest that we work with is 12. So 12 to 18 mostly.
Yeah, that must be an interesting range because I feel like you notice the differences like closer to high school where they're able to create more of that force and tension. I don't know.
There are some 12, 13-year-old boys who are hitting puberty early, and then there's some late bloomers, and the difference between them is pretty wild.
Yeah.
But we try to kind of hit that spot like just before they get there, so they've got a good foundation of just motor behavior and understanding the movements so that we can really kind of press the gas once they hit puberty. But again, a lot of the guys that we work with, I feel like they're overserved relative to females. So we still try to go after a lot of female athletes because even though all the data's out there and how important it is for just injury prevention and performance, not enough of them are doing it yet.
Yeah.
And this is a whole other conversation, but.
Yeah, the female athlete situation, I can see that would be hard to get into because there's so many, I don't know, there's so much that goes into that, especially that 12 to 18 range with young girls. And I remember being so embarrassed about my calves. Like, I'm really like from an emotional standpoint, it was like brutal to do all these calf raises when I knew they were just getting bigger. So I had this battle a little bit of, I'm so grateful for them now, right? Because they're just power producers, which is amazing. But
see, I'm embarrassed about my calves because they're still not big enough. That's probably why, like the era of the 11-inch shorts in like the early 2000s was like not friendly for me because my calves were too small. So I had to, like when the 5-inch inseam came around, like I jumped on that train so fast.
That was so funny. I never thought about that, but all you're seeing is little calves.
My cross to bear.
Yeah,
It's all
yeah,
good.
it's hard. But yeah,
That
I don't know. I feel like that also creates some barriers, but
Yeah, I mean, on that note, let's talk calves and let's talk connective tissue because, I mean, when I look at the calf, I'm thinking about the Achilles tendon, and you've already mentioned some of the stuff with connective tissue, and this is an area of our field that I think is evolving very rapidly.
yeah.
We can probably have hours of conversation around this topic, but let's kind of dial into the population that you're most familiar with working with, which would likely be females. We also talked a little bit off air about males and connective tissue, pelvic floor, but where would be a good area to start? So if I'm a female who's training and I want to go to the gym to get strong, we're always kind of thinking about muscles first.
Hmm.
So how do you even invite like a Gen Pop client into this conversation about connective tissue?
Well, I explained to them that it's really important that we can do both sides of the coin. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have the ability to kind of like fall and catch yourself, and then you have the ability to sort of rebound and push yourself off the ground. And if you can do both of those things really well, your body is going to, as you age, it's going to be really happy.
Oh
Because
yeah.
essentially, the way I look at it now is if we stop thinking of training for muscles, which there's nothing wrong because my client's going to come in and say, I want bigger glutes, I want my
Mm-hmm.
butt to look better. I'm not going to be like, I'm just here to, to train your connective tissue. I mean, they would think I'm nuts. I understand you want big glutes. No, that session, they're going to feel such a burn that they're going to go home and then they're going to sit on the toilet and their ass is going to hurt to sit down because I want to
Yeah.
get home and come back. But I also know that if I give them some yielding capabilities, like if I teach them, I kind of have these, I can talk more about like these buckets that I've created for myself just to make it easier in my brain. If I can get them to a point where they can yield dynamically, which I think is like different than plyometrics, but it's you're changing the tempo or the speed where, and you'll see this a lot on my Instagram, like maybe I'm holding a weight and I just drop and catch it. And that I'm considering more dynamic yielding, not like
Mm.
an isometric yield where I'm like a yielding isometric is like common knowledge, right? You're just holding a weight and then you're holding it for 45 seconds or whatever. And then
Mm-hmm.
the connective tissue in that scenario is rebuilding and it gives time under tension for any potentially tendinopathy or connective tissue that is not as healthy to lay down new collagen, have
Mm-hmm.
that nice lattice like formation or whatever you want to call it. And so, if we know that with yielding isometrics, I think the next layer in my mind is sort of if, well, let me go back. So, if you have that, and then on the other side of the coin, you have things that create more stiffness. So,
Mm-hmm.
like pogo jumps, right? If I'm like constantly bouncing on my toes, or if I'm a basketball player or something, I'm probably going to have really stiff Achilles that are going to be hopefully still pretty elastic at the same time. So, if you're kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
if you have a healthy tendon and you're doing both sides of the coin, it's probably going to stay healthy because it's not going to get too stiff and it's not going to be too compliant in a way that potentially could lead to the actual tissue being damaged, right? So you kind
Mm-hmm.
of have both. And so how I think of it with my clients is I'm going through the big movement patterns. It's a squat, a hinge, a push, a pull. It's all the same stuff that we've always done.
Mm-hmm.
The only difference is sometimes I'm having them yield and sometimes I'm having them create stiffness. And I love starting with isometrics actually, because they're easy. You can work on position. You can say, hey, do you notice that you're hiking your hip? And they're going to get a really good burn and they're going to feel it. So that's a great place to start with a lot of these
Mm-hmm.
concepts. And you can make a isometric either kind of more compliant in nature by yielding, or you can do like an overcoming isometric where you're pulling up against an immovable object. And now their nervous system is getting stimulated and they're sort of like, oh, I'm going as hard as I can when you tell me to do this or whatever it is. So if you move into dynamic exercises, just how I categorize it, so this is a thing. It's just for my own brain. But I think of things where you're dropping a weight and catching.
Mm-hmm.
Or if on the flip side of that, if I'm doing like a Bosch clean and let's
Mm-hmm.
say I'm like going stiff to a bench in front of me, to me, that is a much more stiffer based activity than like a drop split squat where I'm just yielding into the ground. Does that kind of make sense? So one is like fast and pushing pressure forward and trying to use the pelvic floor, or not like I'm cueing the pelvic floor, but like exhale hard as you do this. So you're teaching the body to be able to spring up, but not necessarily leaving the ground like a plyometric would.
Right.
And then the flip side of that would be you're teaching your body to absorb that force and be okay with maybe even inhaling when you're dropping down like that and letting the pelvic floor yield and everything come down. And so, and then of course, whatever's happening, patella or the Achilles or any other tendons in our body. And then once they've gotten pretty good at that, which actually doesn't take that long, assuming they've had a base of some sort of motor control in their life, then we start jumping into plyometrics. And this could be a mixture of all of these things, depending on the client and where they're coming in at. And so by that point, like, I feel like my clients kind of understand that it's normal to be jumping. Like, I understand your gen pop, and that you're here to see me to get bigger muscles or look more lean or whatever it is. But you also, I'm trying to take care of you so you get to keep doing it forever. And so they're fine with it. Jumping, doing Bosch cleans. Like, I have a 75-year-old couple, a male and a female, and they're kind of like these two archetypes. He's like a wide sway back body, really stiff. I'm just like, just do a pigeon stretch, John. You're narrow, got lots of more twists and turns, asymmetry, a lot of more laxity in her body, right? So I have to train them at the same time. So it's sort of hilarious because my brain is always okay. But at this point, it's been like 10 years, so I know exactly what to give them. But yeah, so I just think both of them, regardless, even though John's so stiff, I'm not just going to give him like isometrics to work on stiffness all the time while I give Kate more stiffening drills. I'm pretty much just kind of doing both. You know what I mean? And sometimes if they have something come up, like Kate rolled her ankle, she had to like sprain inversion and eversion sprain. A snake was like she was on a hill. I can't even believe this. Snake tried to bite her. She jumped and went both directions. So that in that case, like during our session, yeah, we're doing things to try to help improve the quality of those tissues so she can get back to full function. But other than that, like most people just need a combination of both. That was a long-winded answer. I don't even know what the question was.
No, that was great. I'm not sure what it was either, but I love the answer. So I like how you are playing with a lot of these tempos, which is going to impose different velocities on the muscle, and then by extension, how that connective tissue behaves. One of the things that you touched on was to normalize jumping for gen pop. And so we kind of danced around the pelvic floor a little bit with the Bosch cleans. But one of the things that I know we're up against with jumping, especially with women, can be the whole bladder issue.
Yeah.
I would like to just kind of talk about this. So from like a very 30,000 foot view, right? Because I don't want to get overly complex, but I think it's important that we discuss this. You're not jumping right into plyometrics because potentially that's an issue, but there's also some other aptitudes of muscle contraction that we want to improve first. So when it comes to the pelvic floor and bridging that gap into jumping, what do we need to be thinking about in terms of how the pelvic floor is functioning, what its role is, and maybe even what we can start to do to improve this?
Yeah, and it is a big problem because now it's even more normalized. So if you think about female lifters, female athletes, I have a woman in my membership who is a physical therapist that works for Manchester United. I guess it's like the female team. I'm not sure if but it's all female soccer players over there. And she said that all the girls just leak on themselves, but they don't care. Like they just wet their pants, they wear pads, like whatever it is while they're training, and they just assume that's normal. And the problem is it's not normal, and it's embarrassing, but it's not embarrassing anymore because it's been normalized. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Now it's not even embarrassing and it's normal. Your body is not managing pressure well. And when your body doesn't manage pressure well, that's when you get injured. And so if that's happening, like maybe we should address their structure a little bit and think about what exercises we're giving them so that they're managing pressure, because that's also how they're going to develop power. Like The least powerful I've ever felt in my life was after I had my son. I had a four-finger diastasis,
Ooh.
and I went to jump on a trampoline with him and peed on myself and went, "Oh my god, this is a thing. Never had this happen in my life." It wasn't, and my back hurt, my neck hurt. I was not powerful. I couldn't jump the way I wanted to. And so to get back to that, it wasn't like I could just start jumping. That wasn't going to work. I
Mm-hmm.
had to learn how to manage pressure first. That was like the foundation. And then I had to learn how to generate stiffness and compliance, usually compliance first, meaning usually that yielding side of the coin first, because we
Mm-hmm.
hold a lot of tension in our pelvic floors, females and males. Like it just so, and I see men all the time, and we do pelvic floor work all the time. And it's quite shocking because you guys don't talk about it because you're not having children and like having to deal with it, and it's not, your bladder's not falling out of your vagina, and you're not having rectal, well, men actually, then they can have hemorrhoids, inability, incontinence, they can have leaking just like a woman, they can have pain with sex, all of these things that it's just for us, it's so like actually in your face a little bit more. So anyway, I think it's important to think about how you're getting them to the place where they're jumping again. And that usually is, in my mind, pressure management first, understanding a little bit about pelvic floor. And there's four kind of quadrants of the pelvic floor, which I know, but for your listeners, like you can think of the front and the back, and then that each has a left and a right side.
Mm-hmm.
And those muscles operate very differently, that we have slow twitch and fast twitch fibers within all of those muscles. And yes, while I inhale, pelvic floor relaxes, and then I exhale and pelvic floor contracts. But if those quadrants are more short on one side and longer on the other, then the internal organs, the bladder, the uterus, is all getting pushed into a different area of the pelvis. And that's where you're going to get that compression onto the bladder to create the incontinence. But what that means to me, even more so, is the same thing is happening at the thoracic diaphragm. And I'm going to have a harder time managing pressure if I've got, let's say, pressure pushing down from the thoracic diaphragm, and on the opposite side, let's say diagonally, I've got pressure pushing up. So now I've got this constant pressure gradient diagonally going in, and I've got a constant pressure gradient on the other side going out. I'm not sure if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense, but imagine the left side of my pelvic floor is really descended, let's just say, on the in the back. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then the right side is descended in the front of the thoracic diaphragm. You see how like the way that the pressure goes, all the guts and all the stuff. And I think that's where the body starts to have problems. So if you can get that pressure management, you can get the diaphragms working really well together, and you can teach them then how to move and do all the things, the dynamic stuff I just talked about, the plyometrics, all of that, you're going to have an athlete or a gen pop person who can be really powerful in their bodies, symptom free. So that's kind of my goal if I'm working with anybody that has pelvic floor symptoms, is they may be seeing a pelvic floor therapist and doing that internal work, but kind of like you said earlier, if they're standing up and jumping around, that can't be enough. And strength training is also not enough, because it's not going to impact the pelvic floor the way a more dynamic or plyometric type activity is going to require that ability to yield and to produce force back.
Good. So for clarification for my own purposes, a lot of the stuff that we talked about with the dynamic yielding, some of the isometrics, these are good entry level activities for regaining some control of this area and then slowly transitioning to more plyometric stuff.
Yes. And that's what I found overall. And I teach it a lot in my alchemy class, like a lot of these principles. And so there are a lot of women in there, and they'll say to me, like, how did I just do a pogo all of a sudden and I didn't leak? That's crazy. I never feel that. Well,
Mm-hmm.
before we did the pogo, we got your foot moving better. I gave you some activities to stiffen up through your lower limb, because if the
Mm-hmm.
lower limb, let's say I've got this kind of janky lower limb that's just like flat footed and can't
Mm-hmm.
create that stiffness, well, I have to get the stiffness somewhere, and that's usually going to be in the pelvic floor. And if the pelvic floor is constantly holding tension and tight all the time to stabilize a pelvis that's more lax or a lower limb that can't create stiffness, then all of a sudden I give it a hard smack on the ground and I leak because I can't hold that pressure anymore,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
just like any tired muscle. If I had to hold a bicep curl for 24 hours a day or 20,000 breaths or whatever, and then it's super tight all the time, and then all of a sudden you take my arm and go, this is going to be so easy
Yeah.
to get those muscles to just give out, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's just fatigue, right? If it's
Yeah.
constantly on and creating tension, like I mean, the littlest bit's going to spill over.
Yeah.
So I'll admit, up to a fairly recent point, I've kind of tuned out pelvic floor stuff because I don't work with a ton of women who have those issues. And as a guy, I'm like, whatever, I just lift things. But I think there's a lot of opportunity here for just understanding internal dynamics of how we're creating pressure, how that is stabilizing not just the pelvic floor, but the entire spine, and how that can be useful for athletes, male athletes even, who want to generate more power or express more strength. So, can we talk about a little bit about this side of the coin?
Yeah. Yeah. So imagine that I'm going to do a deadlift and the back of my pelvic floor, your coccygeus muscles kind of attach on the sacrum. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they pull that sacrum kind of under, if you imagine, it's called counter nutation or just kind of tipping back within the pelvis. And a deadlift requires me, hopefully, to be able to nutate and get those tissues to lengthen. Yes, you could probably pull a ton of weight off the floor without those lengthening. You can do a nice flexed deadlift and have no problems whatsoever. But I would say if you're doing that really well, great. You don't have to change anything. But if you want to do it even better, you could try to get a little bit of recoil in those tissues because then all of a sudden you have very strong muscles. Just even right now, everybody that's listening, do a Kegel. Feel how much tension you can actually build there. And also because you've got like tons of ligamentous tissue back there, your sacrotuberous ligaments, if you can get just a little more stretch and think about the power you're going to get out of that. I mean, that's not, it's just like the Achilles, right? If you have too stiff of an Achilles, you're not going to have as much power. And if you have too compliant of Achilles, you're not going to have as much power. So that same concept technically is happening in the pelvic floor. So I'm not saying like you necessarily have to get that length to produce power. I'm saying, what if by getting more length and understanding these things, you actually did get more power? And I've seen it happen. I know we talked about a colleague of ours that I worked with and how
Mm-hmm.
he did so well with some of these concepts and working on just releasing his pelvic floor and having to do some pretty heavy lifting. And I've had a lot of guys like that do consults with me, and a lot of them are kind of like embarrassed, but they're like, I know this is an issue. I can feel it. My back hurts every time I try to deadlift. Like it feels like shit. I've got a torn labrum. I've got hip impingement. Like all of those things are symptoms of the internal dynamics being off. It's not just the hip issue. It's not just a low back issue. It's your inability to manage pressure and get the pelvic floor to be responsive.
So, from a diagnostic standpoint, are we looking at somebody's ability to hinge? Obviously, that would be for the posterior pelvic floor. Are you looking at both? How well can they hinge versus how well can they squat? I mean, what's the entry point here?
I mean, I guess it depends on the person, but yeah, I mean, in this course that I have coming out, it's just like a free 8-day mini course thing. But I mean, I have them actually palpate. I have a video of like how you can palpate the different quadrants of the pelvic floor and see if you can let it go. But also, when you're watching someone squat or deadlift, you're going to see things like shifting off to one side, having to always shove their rib cage forward in order to get the job done, rotating the pelvis, literally rotating one direction or the other while they're squatting. That's all an inability of those tissues to probably be able to yield somewhere.
Mm.
So either the pelvic floor can't yield down or the thoracic diaphragm can't yield up, like usually in one of those four quadrants in both, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so the cool thing about the pelvic floor, unlike the thoracic diaphragm, is you can actually physically feel it in your body. and you can work on breathing down into it to create that yield. And then you can create exercises that up against gravity that teach you how to do the exact same thing.
I'm going to need some practice on this once the course come out.
Today. Well, I think we're going to start on the 21st, but you could sign up today. Yeah, no, you'll probably find it really interesting. I would love to hear what you think about it. And I said in the video, we're going to get up close and personal with our pelvic floors, but it's pretty mind opening. And then all of a sudden you're doing a split squat and you can literally create that pressure down. And it's, oh, I just felt that in the back of my pelvic floor. That's so weird. I've never felt that before. And it's, yeah, because there's a lot of really strong muscles. I mean, really think about it. I almost want to say the pelvic floor, poor pelvic floor, right? Because you got this 20, 30,000 breaths a day. So these two diaphragms that have to work all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, this diaphragm gets the help of gravity pushing down, and this one's always trying to push back up. And then you add, for women at least, 10-pound baby and gaining 30 pounds in 9 months and all of those things. And now you're managing so much more all the time. And that would be the same as athletes, right? Because they're just having to manage pressure that's much more intense in their sport and in their training. So we can give them tools to manage that pressure better. It can go a really long way in improving how they feel and also their performance.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to make sure my wife walks on me while I'm palpating my taint area, trying to find my pelvic floor.
So proud of you.
So,
actually, she had 5 children, right? 4 pregnancies.
4 pregnancies, 3 were natural. The twins were C-section.
Okay, so she's gotten all the good things in her body.
Yeah. She's done. I'm super interested in this, and I love the way that you kind of just bring awareness to it, because I've really never heard anybody talk about the issues with guys. And I think there's probably, at least for me, I always want to connect it to performance and just feeling good, because I feel like when athletes feel good, they play good.
Yeah.
And we've got plenty of athletes who, I would say it's fairly obvious, right? They come in and we ask them to deadlift and they can't hinge. They can't do a RDO.
Mm-hmm.
And so restoring that capability is very critical, because I can't just throw them down in a hip thrust and just have them smash glute max. I mean, that's going to make problems significantly worse. So, I mean, I guess maybe why I'm kind of going on this tangent, what are some of your thoughts or favorite strategies around improving this deadlift or hinging pattern?
Well, if someone's really new, I put them in an all fours position first. And I like to just add one of the small yoga blocks under their knee to give them kind of that sensation of shifting into their hip. This is usually how I progress. Because it's a direct feeling of kind of pushing the femur back in the socket and then opening up the sit bones. And a lot of people, you'll be surprised, cannot tilt their pelvis forward and back without their rib cage coming along for the ride. They just can't do it. Yep. And these are the people that can't hinge well, or they have to overuse their rib cage position to get the job done. So either they're crunching down with their rectus and going into a little more of a rounded back deadlift or hinge, or they're going into that excessive extension, ribs flaring out. Yeah. And just overusing their erectors and everything. And I will always say this, neither one of those strategies is bad. Like I said earlier with my gymnastics, every single thing I did was compensatory, right? It's not bad. It's only if it's posing a problem. Either their performance is not as good as they would like, or they're having pain or issues. And so the all fours is great because you can kind of have them shift over and then you can tilt the pelvis front and back. And I'll even put some people who really struggle, I'll put their rib cage over a bench. So their hands are on the floor on the other side. So the ribs are on lockdown. They can't go anywhere. And all they have is their pelvis to tilt back and forth and to shift side to side. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, yeah, I feel that stretch. I see what you're saying. And then you have them inhale and say, can you feel the pressure going back and down towards your rectum? And when they can get to that point, then I know they've been able to lengthen through those tissues. And you may not even need to use that cue because they may just get into the position. Then you take that up to a kickstand hinge and just coach them really well in that. Teach them to get in their midfoot, teach them to get the pelvis from hiking one direction or the other, or over rotating or whatever it is, and just have them hold it as an ISO and feel that the amount of tension that you can generate at length. And then once they start getting that, then you can go into a bilateral deadlift pretty easily and they can sense that.
I really like that. I've seen the hands over the bench to stabilize the rib cage, but I haven't thought about doing it offset like that to bias one side. I'm gonna have to steal it. I'm gonna
It
have to
works
steal
really
that.
well. Yeah. Because people just can't feel it like where they are. And then they try to lift their sit bones and then their ribs just thrust forward. And you're like, what do I? And I don't really love the band. A lot of people will put like a band around the back and then like push
Yeah.
away. I feel like they end up going into too much flexion. It's just like an awkward, especially people who are more sway back and have a lot of thoracic flexion, but then they
Yeah.
still have a big rib flare. It's like, how do you work with that? You know what I mean? It's just a hard position.
Yeah. I've played around with some stuff too, where kind of to your point, like I'll have people like look forward and extend their neck to drive a little more extension so that they can separate hip versus back motion. So literally purposefully locking the back into a single unit so they can't move through it. But then that poses the problem of just motor learning. What's the consequence of this 3-4 months down the road? Are they going to be able to actually find a neutral position and still move through the hips, or am I just creating a monster? Whereas like old school was like, look up at the ceiling no matter what you do, just like arch your back, who cares?
Yeah.
So I'll have to play with that a little bit.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, and there's also so much correlation with the neck too, like in terms of finding that neutral, just the upper cervical spine, if that's on lockdown, which a lot of people's are because we're always staring at our phones and our computers, that can be problematic. I mean, if you lay on your back and you just do a little tiny chin tuck and open up the upper cervical spine, all of a sudden that's where your pelvis should be. Like if you just let your body do it, you
Yeah.
find neutral really quick. Because for a long time, I was tucking everything because that's what I learned in PRI was like sort of go into this posterior tilt. And now I don't do that at all, hardly. I mean, sometimes if somebody's in major extension and they don't have any more lumbar flexion, then I can do that. But I like to keep more neutral. A lot of times I'll put a towel roll underneath their lumbar so they're kind of have more of a neutral spine. I don't know when we
Yeah.
got too far away from that. When did I? And then I kind of came back around and I was like, this doesn't actually make sense because it's just compressing my posterior pelvic floor.
Yeah. It's like the whole, I really tucked myself by tucking. So
Yeah,
gotta untuck it.
Yeah.
Okay. We're getting close to an hour here. I do want to talk one more topic, glutes, because we have to. I want to talk about growing glutes because a lot of the GMAX activities, I think, can compress the backside of the pelvis, especially with these massive squeeze the glutes at the top. We already talked about the hip thrust. So just talk me through like training glutes, getting them to grow, but still maintaining movement through the pelvis.
Yeah. I mean, I think, look, if you want to get glutes to grow, awesome. It's not like necessarily my priority for myself. We're talking about a lot of hypertrophy, and I don't know when this whole thing like started in the 90s. All of us were supposed to have fake boobs, and now we're supposed to have big butts. And I'll post something about glutes, like activating your glutes, number of comments that are, you shouldn't be talking about this. Your glutes aren't big enough, da, da, da. And I'm like, okay, well, I didn't
Dang.
making them big. I want them to work really well. And maybe that's not my priority because I don't really care.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not
Damn.
trying to impress anybody with my ass, really. So anyway, it's just like an interesting because then we have all these women that are going to the gym and trying to achieve these results that a lot of times when you look at these people on Instagram, they're just naturally more inclined to have more tissue in that area as well. Now, some of them definitely train and get to that point, but I don't think it's necessarily the norm to have that.
Sure.
Like, I think it is just you're genetically gifted or whatever you want to call it to have that structure. I was genetically given calves. Just kidding. Calves are going to be glute. Someday, right? I'll make it. But I do think you can go after all of that stuff. I love an abduction machine, right? It's great. I love the like donkey kick. We have one at Gold's, like the machine where you put your foot on and you're just doing like donkey kicks against this resisted kind of step thing. But I think if you can get into a squat and you can actually lengthen through the back of your pelvic floor and get those tissues to yield, you'll actually start to realize that squats can train your glutes. They're not all quad dominant. And I think that's a great way to restore motion. And then I also really love to have people do kickstand hinge where they're rotating over the femur and back out of it. So yeah, go if you want that. You can definitely like hammer a bunch of bridges and really go after that ER and glute max. But maybe in your accessory work, you're doing a little bit of the split stance hinging, rotating over your femur. You're getting in a good squat position when you're doing your squats to open things up on that side of the coin.
So again, we're going back to control your pelvis so you can actually access the tissues in the proper way, and then just layer in the appropriate amount of training to get these things stimulated.
Yeah, and actually step-ups, probably should say this because step-ups are like by far one of my very favorite lower body exercises because people usually can do them pretty well. But if you do it with a cable in front of you, if I put a cable on the bottom and I hold the cable, so I'm in a little bit more of a hingier position, they're gonna work your glutes so much. And it's kind of restorative in the movement because you're single leg, you're getting a little more rotation out of it. Yeah. So even just following up some heavy bridging or hip thrust with some deadlifts. I also think just a back, I guess it's called a back extension machine, but like using that and really just focusing on the glutes because you can kind of like go all the way down and get that stretch. And then you can come back up and you'll feel your glutes really work. But because you're going at to full length, I think maybe with the hip thrust, the problem is that like, you're never going down into like full stretch. So I do single leg hip thrust where my back's on like a stability ball and then my foot's on a bench. And then I let my hips go way down. So I'm getting that length and then thrusting back up. And that works really well too. Now I can't load it. So it's not like I'm going to do a 400-pound hip thrust if that's what you're doing to grow.
Yeah, I think by the time you hit some narrow stance squats, you hit some accessory hip thrusts, some step ups, like you got a pretty good game plan going. It's just kind of consistency over time at that point.
Right. Yeah.
But I know a lot of people I get a lot of females that still ask me about glutes, and I'm like, oh, it's squat
I'm
deep.
just waiting for it to pass where it's like, what's the next body part for females that we can fixate on and make a big deal? It's like,
when are calves gonna get their turn, Katie?
I know. Just wait. I'm coming for you. I wish they would because at least with calves, if you're training really big calves, you got some ability to produce power. You know what I mean? There's one thing I think
got that low torque.
Yeah. I'm gonna stay bouncy. That's my goal. I want to stay springy my whole life.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. I mean, adults, I think everybody talks about the sarcopenia or osteopenia, but really the loss of power and the jumping capability, like that clearly differentiates young people from old people.
It really does. It's crazy to see like people my age that just can't move anymore. I mean, I'm 46, that's when it starts. And you can tell they haven't trained it in so long, but it's trainable, right? And we can all learn to do it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think more people, especially Gen Pop, need to be doing that. Like I tell people, like, look, we're gonna train adults just like athletes. Like you may not jump onto a 60-inch box. You may not be power cleaning as much weight as possible, but like the principles of all of this stuff is going to be inside of your program. I want to see you get stronger in measurable ways. I want to see you get bouncier and more reactive in measurable ways. Conditioning, same thing. Like all of these things have to happen.
Yeah. And I think the issue is like, well, Stacey Sims is a great person who talks a lot about women's health and nutrition. And on many podcasts, I've heard her say, you need to lift heavy and you need to start jumping for bone density, for hormonal reasons, menopause, all these things. That's great advice, but you need to make sure you're getting there in the right way so that you don't get injured and then you got 3 weeks off and then you're not loading anything. that's where I think there's like a big gap between this stuff. And I'm sure
Yeah.
that's what you find. It's not like you could just take a 60-year-old client and be like, okay, we're going to start jumping now and we're going to go lift really heavy. You do have to build the base a lot of the time to be able to do that safely and not get injured. Because then get injured, well, you just got set back 3 weeks and now the cycle continues.
Yeah, it can be too much too fast. And I think you laid out a really phenomenal blueprint today in terms of talking about just the connective tissue behavior, kind of thinking beyond just muscles and stuff. And I know most of the people coming to see us are not going to be in tune with that. And hell, there's probably a lot of professionals who still are thinking in that way. Cause I mean, that's the pedigree. That's what we're taught when we're coming up.
Yeah.
And then also just talking about some of the other dynamics of how the movement and respiration and pelvis and in these concepts with the yielding contractions all work together to like kind of get people back to just athleticism. I mean, is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to be able to do whatever. If I want to go hike a 13er, if I want to play pickleball for 3 hours, if I want to play tennis, if I want to go kiteboard, like whatever I want to do, I want a body that feels like it wouldn't, if it can get there right then and there, or it wouldn't take that much to get there. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? If I was going to go do a big hike like that, okay, well, I'm not that far off from, or maybe could just go do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's how people are wanting to live. I was talking to my client, we're the same age today. And she was talking about her dad and she's just wish my dad was still active. He's not really doing anything now. And he used to play like softball and go hiking and do all this stuff. And now he's not. And I said, yeah, that's so interesting. And I said, my dad's very active, but he doesn't like go to a gym and work out. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think how old are you?
39.
39. Okay. I think our generation, like in general, that's when it started to become exercise became big, like going to
Mm-hmm.
a gym.
Yep.
And so I kind of came up in that, and the generation before didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But some of my best clients that are paying me the money every week, 2 times a week for years now, are my parents' generation. And
Mm-hmm.
so for us, it seems kind of normal to want that. And I think as we age, it's going to be even more important because our generation is not going to settle for just becoming sedentary and not wanting to do all these things. We're going to continue to want to push the limits. Can you imagine being 70 and not doing anything?
I can't imagine being any age and not doing anything.
I mean, I want to be 90, like playing golf or whatever. I don't care. Like it has to be something. So I think this field it's really a great time to be in it, actually.
Mm-hmm.
At our age, because I think we're going to see this transition with our generation specifically that's going to be really unique.
Yeah. And I'll be interested to see the younger generation because they're so locked into technology that
Yeah.
it's almost different again
Yeah.
in a different way. Like they have very structured sports and activities, but they don't have unstructured play like we did. Like my mom was just like, get the hell out of the house, don't come back. I'm like, okay, we're gonna figure something out.
That's
We're gonna go.
really why I live in this neighborhood. I wanted to find a place like that. So
Mm,
my son now, he's at the age where it's, I don't know, just go get on your bike and find a friend. And I'll have 5 kids at my house. They're just running around in the yard. Like
I love it.
it kind of depends, I think, on where you're growing up. And if you have the ability to, nothing's safe, as we all know, but a little bit of a safer environment where you feel like you can let them go. Cause my parents were the same way. I just like, get out of the house. But yeah, I think technology is going to have a huge impact on these kids and their health.
Hmm.
Yeah. But what are we
Man,
going to do? I mean,
parenting is so hard.
it's,
Fitness is easy. Jumping with pelvic floor problems is easy. Parenting is, I don't know, that's hard.
yeah, just get them off the screens as much as you can, I guess. But it's like they go to school and they're on screens all day too.
I
So
know.
it's wild. I don't know. We could have a
Okay.
whole podcast about that.
We could. I
Kids and
need
getting on
I need
screens.
it. I need advice. So let's talk your mentorship and other projects you have coming up.
So I have that course right now. If anybody's interested in learning about that, and I'm going to do the live Q&A at the end of it. I don't know when this is coming out, but that starts on the 21st of April. And then I'm actually only running my course twice this year. So I'll run I'm doing a pre-recorded version in May for anybody that just wants to do it at their own pace, because I'm teaching in Germany and Austria in September. And so I'm working on an in-person course that I want to start doing in a few places overseas. And then I'll do another live course round of my course in September. So I'm just doing it twice. I'm in the middle of it right now. And then another one in September.
That's exciting.
Yeah. I'm excited to go overseas. So my assistant lives in Austria, so she's kind of set this whole thing up. And then I have lots of people in my membership that are in other countries. Ironically enough, this is so bizarre. On Instagram, you can go on there and see where the most people that follow you.
Yeah.
I have New York and then Perth, Australia.
Okay.
That's so weird. So I was thinking about going to Australia too.
You should go everywhere.
Everywhere. I feel like it would be fun.
And be paid to do it.
I traveled so much in my 20s, like all over the world, one of those around the world trips. And it's been so long that I think now is a good time to start trying to do a couple trips a year.
Yeah, we went to Italy for my wife's 50th last year. And I'm like, look, we are like not getting any younger. I'm like, we have to start just going. And it's hard. It's hard with kids, like super difficult, but I'm like, bye.
Yeah.
Juice is up. We are hitting the runway, and it was great. Yeah. And we're looking to keep that going.
Did you go with kids, or did just the two of you go?
It was just her and I.
Oh, good for you. Yeah. That's nice. I want to take Quincy. I just don't think he's quite old enough to manage those flights.
Yeah.
But my parents are watching him this time. I have the best parents. Like, they'll just come anytime and keep them. But yeah, like I think for a kid trying to go overseas can be a little bit hard at first, but I do want him to go eventually.
Katie, thank you so much. This was awesome. I know I was kind of all over the board today, but I think for us going off the script, like it was really fun. And I thought we touched on some great topics. So I'll make sure people get those links to find out more about you. But what's like the best place online for people to find you?
Probably just my website, katiestclairfitness.com. There's a ton of like free stuff on there too, or Instagram, same thing, Katie St. Clair Fitness. Yeah, thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to rate and review us with 5 stars only. Then subscribe so you can get all the latest updates.